We have to have you here because there's so much happening in the nation. So let's dig right into it. My first question to you has to be about the biggest news that happened over this past weekend, which was President Donald Trump's acquittal. He was charged for inciting violence on the January 6th Capitol riot attack. And he was charged and he was impeached, but he was acquitted. So my first question to you has to be, how are you looking at this acquittal? Were you expecting it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because a vast number of the Republicans, especially in the Senate, are looking to take his lead, are looking toward his base of supporters. And I don't think any of them had any interest, any self-interest, to be more specific, in finding themselves face another election and an uphill battle at that. I think all of them want to tap into Donald Trump's base, which is sizable. He does have a huge following, even though he lost the presidential race last year. The fact is that he does have that following, and a lot of people who aspire to higher office, maybe the presidency itself, want to tap into Donald Trump's followers. And so therefore, the last thing they wanted to do was to annoy those followers and be a part of the process of convicting the former president. And therefore, this vote was quite expected, in my opinion.
How did you look at the Republican senators who voted to convict him? I believe it was 57 senators total that voted. How did you look at that?
Yeah, 7 Republicans went with the idea of conviction and with the ruling of conviction. And I think that shows that there are many with a conscience in there. The fact was that this was tried on the merits of the case, which was the fact that the former president, or at least the presentation was that the former president had incited the January 6th riot that took place on the Capitol, an affront to democracy, an insult to democracy, to be even more specific. And I think there were some people with a conscience who stood up and said, that's about enough. Even Mitch McConnell, the minority leader in the Senate, who voted to acquit, had made it very clear and continues to make it clear in the aftermath of that ruling of the Senate decision that what happened is not by any means excusable. And he's given one of the ways out, which is that while the Senate, in his opinion, was not in a position to convict a former president, as opposed to a sitting chief executive, he did say that there was recourse in regular courts of the United States to try him on such charges in a regular courthouse. So even he spoke with something of a conscience to say, look, what happened was totally unconscionable.
Right. There were some troublesome videos that we saw during this entire trial, videos that were not seen before. How did you look at those?
Well, those were frightening. Those were from the presentation of those videos, it appeared to be a well-planned attack. Not something that was spontaneous or just spurred by the former president's words, but something that was in the planning and in the mode of an attack plan on top of it. So there were it seemed some of it was planned with military precision as well. And as it turns out, many of those arrested have had backgrounds in the armed forces. Many have had backgrounds even in the FBI. There was one prime suspect who, it turned out, used to be with the FBI at one time, and he had top security clearance. And there are many, many such instances that are playing out as more and more information becomes available and as more is known about the suspects involved. So this was by no means a spontaneous act. It was not an act where people were just riled into doing something, but rather a well-planned operation.
Right. Before I get into what happened today and what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said, President Joe Biden, throughout the trial, basically took a backseat and didn't comment much on what was happening. Do you think that was deliberately done, and was that wise on his part?
Yeah, I think it was wise on his part. I think it was deliberate, obviously. He has indicated from the beginning, once the election was over, he made it very clear. In fact, before the election was over, and it seemed like he might ultimately be elected president of the United States, he was telling party colleagues and others that would soon be in power that he'd rather see this on the back burner. He doesn't want to play this whole thing out because it's going to take away attention from the agenda of the Biden administration. And the Biden administration's agenda is very clear, is to get a good handle on this pandemic, is to revive the economy, to get us back to a pre-pandemic jobs situation, which was almost 100% employment and that type of thing. He wants the focus to be on what he wants to do to save America for all Americans. And I think he really didn't want to have this played out and butt its way into his administration's efforts to make some progress now and to take control of the country and have the nation heal.
Right. I think that's his biggest thing, is to have the nation heal. He actually referred to the Capitol attack as a sad chapter in American history, which should be remembered by all. On the Capitol attack, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is calling for a 9/11 style commission to investigate the January 6th riot. This happened after 9/11 to truly investigate what was happening in the nation in regards to the incident. How are you looking at that? And today, President Joe Biden has backed that investigation. How important will that investigation be, and how different will that be from the trial we saw?
Yeah, that would be because of it. Well, first of all, a good question. It would be a bipartisan. In fact, it would be an independent inquiry. If you have a 9/11 style commission or a John F. Kennedy assassination commission, anything like that, something that's big, that has a historic meaning or historic context in the nation, it is extremely important that this be independent. So I think what's going to happen if a commission is appointed, it would be an independent commission. It would look at all the facts, regardless of any party lineage or anything like that, and therefore come to some kind of objective decision as to what went wrong, how this happened, how it was allowed to happen, who the perpetrators were, where did the planning take place, and most important, how to prevent something like this from happening in the future. After all, this was an attack on the very soul of our democratic nation, on the very soul of our democracy, as it were. I don't think anybody disputes that, except those who had an interest in carrying out the act itself. I think anybody who has a conscience, whether in politics, in religion, in state, they all felt the same way, that this was an attack on our very soul of American democracy. And it's time to find out, get to the truth of it, get to the truth behind it, and figure out how to stop it in future.
Yes, I think in modern history, it's one of the most troublesome images we have seen when you look at a monument which is so important to the country. What do you think is going to be the Trump legacy when you're looking at all of this?
Well, that's his legacy. His legacy is that, from what I've seen, and objectively again, I want to remind your viewers, I'm neither Republican nor Democratic. I am an independent, registered voter as an independent, by the way. His legacy seems to me to be quite obvious. One who sowed confusion, one who sowed a lot of chaos. He did a lot of good too, by the way. I've always pointed that out. There have been some really good things his administration has done. For instance, one outstanding example has been to challenge China openly. He went to the other extreme of calling the virus a China virus. But now it turns out that the World Health Organization and its team of scientists that have gone to Wuhan, where the source of the alleged virus, or the alleged source of the virus, and it turns out that China knew a lot more, much earlier, much sooner than it let the rest of the world know. And so President Trump had, from the very outset, spoken about that, mentioned it repeatedly. There were some good things he did. There were some decisions he took that were good. But the legacy will now remain, to the point of your question, will now remain this particular Capitol Hill riot. And if it is not resolved one way or the other, that will be his biggest legacy, that democracy almost suffered a mortal wound on that day, the fateful day of the 6th of January, 2021.
Do you think this makes it difficult to have a bipartisan government? Do you see a bipartisan support for what President Joe Biden is trying to bring in the nation?
I think I still am optimistic about bipartisan support for this administration, for the Biden administration, and that's purely due to the fact that Joe Biden was a senator for many, many years. He has served decades in Washington, D.C. He knows everyone, almost everyone at least, on a first name basis. He is able to craft, cooperation, coordination, mutual respect, and these are essential traits of a good leader. So I think he will be able to achieve the bipartisanship he's looking for. It may take a bit of, convincing, but Joe Biden's no stranger to convincing people. He has been in key positions throughout his career, both as a senator and as the vice president of this country. And I think he will achieve in that task of his going ahead.
Let's talk about this Biden administration a little bit, because there's a lot that's happening again and we want to get to the core of it. This week, President Biden is traveling to Wisconsin and Michigan on his agenda, which is the pandemic, defeating the pandemic, and reviving the battered economy. What do you think are his major challenges ahead in those two departments?
Major challenges, number one is getting control of the virus. And hand in hand with that is to roll out the vaccines quickly, because the population needs to be vaccinated as quickly as possible to be able to somewhat end this pandemic. We don't even know how it's going to work. If it does not roll out swiftly enough, if the vaccines do not roll out swiftly enough, we may lose control of the pandemic and have to go through these cycles a couple more years all over again. I think that's why he's giving this urgent thought to it. That is why there is this urgent feeling for it, and that's why he wants to hold these town halls. He wants to go out and address the public, take his message out to the people directly, to tell them what needs to be done and explain it to them in a way that they are convinced. The other thing is, of course, the economy, which you mentioned. Yes, they go hand in hand. The pandemic is the reason for the vast destruction in the world economy. And now the repair must begin. And that repair process begins along with the vaccination rollout, controlling the virus spread, which means masking up, wearing gloves where necessary, social distancing, and all the things we've come to get used to now in this past year. And I think he's trying to take that message out to the people. It has not been done in the past several months, of course, under the Trump administration, as it should have. Initially, the Trump administration did go to the people, did talk about locking down and all the rest of it, and then distracted itself from those maneuvers. And so we now have to get back on track. And I think that's what he's trying to do.
Right. How are you looking at the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, and especially the $1,400 stimulus checks? Why are they trying to do this massive COVID relief, according to you, and what will be the impact of that?
Well, the idea is to go big right now when the interest rates are low, and even if the deficit were to increase, because obviously the United States Treasury itself would have to start borrowing money to pay all this out. And it would accrue interest, and that's what leads into generations of, being in the red. And I think that's the biggest fear. The conservatives, especially the Republicans, have always been wary of that, about going into the red too deep for future generations to have to pick up that burden, that financial burden. But Biden has spoken very, very equivocally, very clearly, as his now Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has, that if we've got to go big, let's go all out now. Interest rates are almost at zero, and in fact are at zero in many, many respects. And therefore, borrowing is not expensive now. So if you have to borrow, we borrow, go out there, flood the economy, get people, support people that need to be supported, because there are still millions who are unemployed. There are many who are not going to get those jobs back ever again. There are many businesses that have been destroyed by the pandemic and its consequences. And there are many state governments that are in dire financial states, which also need assistance, Republican or Democratic states. So you got to go completely big. The 1.9, I think, is a little less, actually. It should have been 2-point-something trillion, I thought. I'm no economic expert, but just logistically and logically thinking, I think you need to go bigger. But he's going big enough. And I think once that's through, we'll see by the end of this year, things should be much better. There will be an economic turnaround and a health turnaround as well.
So let me ask you a quick point here, and I believe I've asked you that before too on the show. Do we have enough money in the country right now to help every single American?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is the richest country on earth. There are trillions of dollars that the corporate world also has stacked up. Bill Clinton used to point this out all the time, as did President Barack Obama, as did President George W. Bush, that people also forget that corporate America will play a big role in all of this too. And there's a lot of money that corporations have sitting doing nothing as well. So there are places to borrow. There are places to allocate funds through tax breaks or whatever, and to be able to take care of those at the bottom rung of the ladder in the United States. Now, you can't have a socialist system, obviously, where you're going to just support people endlessly. No. The idea is not to support people endlessly, but this has been an unusual year in our memory, in recent memory, and probably in memory for the last couple of centuries. We have never faced a crisis like this. It is not of anyone's doing. It is a natural occurrence, or in some cases, maybe someone will say an unnatural occurrence that we had a virus of this type that came out and affected all of us. But we know essentially it brought the world to its knees. And so the only way you can fight something like this is go on that war footing. As Biden says, he says we're at war with this virus. He's right. We are at war with this virus. Donald Trump said the same thing early on. It's like going to war. We're going to war. And he says, look at all these, frontline workers putting on their gear. They look like soldiers fighting. And he was right, too. It is a war against this virus, and once we get it under control, we'll be fine. We don't have to be a socialist state to do that, but we do have to inject enough into the economy to get us out of this morass.
I just have 3 more questions left here for you. The first one is President Joe Biden has signed a series of executive orders since he's been, the president of this country. Which executive orders stood out the most for you? Which were the most important ones?
I think the ones to halt the separations of the border,
right.
The protections for the DACA recipients, they've been in limbo, they've been worried, etc. The Affordable Health Care Act, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, to extend some of those provisions right now, especially during this health emergency. Very important executive actions. Reversal of the so-called Muslim ban.
Right.
I'm not sure that was a top priority at this time, but he believed it was wrong, and therefore he signed that executive order. That was one of the first ones he signed on day one of being in office. But just about every one of the executive orders has been focused on undoing what President Donald Trump had sought to do. And that was to bring back some order now into the process. Immigration has always been a very complex issue. It will continue to be a complex issue. Trying to solve it with an executive order, either under the Trump administration or under this one, is not going to be the way out. Eventually, it's going to be legislation to find especially a path to citizenship for the 11 or 12 million undocumented workers in this country. And once that happens, I think we can begin to strengthen the borders a lot better and make sure that there isn't a porous border where people can just come in and out. If that solution means having a wall, I'm not so certain. There's a lot of technology out there now, drone technology that can be used, for instance, to trace those who are trespassing the border, entering illegally. You don't need a physical wall actually to stand up there. We all know that now from using these computers. Like I'm here with you on a laptop. And we know that there are firewalls and things like that that can be used to prevent illegal intruders or hackers from coming in to watch what I'm doing or see what I'm doing. Similarly, at the border, we can have some sort of security motion in effect over there, which uses high technology. And I think that would work perfectly. So the executive orders have been on the right track. I think a lot of it is going to have to be legislated, though, and that's what's going to be coming up next.
Right. This brings me to a really important point. My next question is, how are you looking at the foreign relationships of United States with other countries in the world under this administration? There's going to be a lot of conversation that countries need to have throughout this pandemic to truly combat it. How are you looking at President Joe Biden handling that?
It's a tough job. He's going to have to, because President Trump had a more gruff persona about him.
Right.
And it was either you're a friend of ours or you're not, and we toss you aside. And that was his style of governing. It was his style of doing business too. Either you were an ally of Donald Trump's or you weren't. So to explain this to viewers in the context, he was not a politician, but he was very much a Trump and a businessman Trump that he's always been all his life. So he had a different style of dealing with foreign leaders. That does not bode well for long-term relationships in many cases. In many cases, he was admired. So now Biden's job is to try and get back to the status quo which existed before the Trump administration. And it's going to be a tall order, because now you have to win back the trust of those who don't trust America anymore. So he's got a double purpose. He's going to have to go out there to convince them, look, we're back. America's back. We're going to be the leader of the world. But now you got to prove to the world that you're the leader, because many of them don't consider you the leader anymore. They think you're just the, somebody who's been, out there and, pursuing a whole different, action whatsoever. So it's going to be a tough job for him.